It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in Washington, D.C. The city hummed with a familiar energy, horns blaring, pedestrians weaving through crowded sidewalks, the constant pulse of a nation at work. Donald Trump, the President of the United States, had just concluded a string of high-stakes meetings and was on his way back to the White House. The weight of national responsibility pressed heavily on him, as it often did, but that day something felt different. A quiet unease lingered in the air. As the motorcade moved through the streets, Trump's gaze drifted to a lone police officer standing at a corner. She stood upright, disciplined, yet her shoulders were tense. Her face, usually meant to be unreadable, was etched with distress. There was something unmistakable about her pain, something that reached him instantly. On instinct, he spoke. "Pull over." The decision surprised even his staff, but it felt right. This was more than a passing moment. Trump stepped out of the vehicle and approached her slowly. His presence was commanding, yet calm. The officer hadn't noticed him at first. Her eyes were fixed on the ground as she wiped away a tear she had fought hard to suppress. Her hands trembled slightly. Police officers were trained to absorb chaos and suffering without showing cracks, but this woman was clearly overwhelmed. "Excuse me," Trump said gently. She startled, straightening at once, and turned to face him. Surprise and confusion crossed her face. Why would the president stop for her? She had only been trying to survive a moment of weakness. His expression softened as he took in the exhaustion and emotional strain she carried. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice free of judgment, only concern. Caught off guard, she blinked. The question alone felt unexpected, almost disarming. She forced a small smile, trying to regain control. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice cracked just enough to betray her. Neither of them believed it. Trump remained silent, giving her space. He didn't rush her. He didn't press. And in that quiet, something broke. "It's just the pressure," she finally said, her words spilling out unevenly. "The constant danger, always being on edge. Lately it's been harder. People don't understand how heavy this job is. Sometimes I feel like I can't do it anymore." The raw honesty of her confession hit him hard. This wasn't a uniform standing before him. It was a human being, carrying more than anyone ever asked her to. "I understand," Trump said quietly. "Sometimes the weight of the world becomes too much. We all have breaking points. But it's not about the breaking. It's about finding the strength to rise again." His words weren't rehearsed or political. They were real, words he himself needed to hear at times. The officer's composure finally gave way. Tears fell freely as she nodded, overwhelmed not just by her emotions, but by the fact that the President of the United States was standing there, listening. "I feel so lost sometimes," she whispered. Trump didn't interrupt. When he spoke again, his voice carried a personal depth. "I know what it's like to feel lost," he said. "The pressure, the expectations, the feeling that everyone depends on you, it can make you feel like you're drowning. But it's in those dark moments that you discover what you're made of. Hardship doesn't define us. How we rise from it does." She met his eyes, stunned by how deeply his words resonated. Power and position faded in that moment. What remained was shared humanity. They stood in silence for a while, connected not by rank or title, but by the quiet truth that no one, no matter who they are, is immune to struggle. Wiping her tears, she took a steadying breath. "No one's ever said something like that to me," she admitted. "I thought you'd just see me as another officer who's supposed to be strong all the time." Trump shook his head. "No one is invincible. We all need someone to lean on." Before leaving, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small card, simple, without slogans or titles, just his name and a number. "If you ever need to talk," he said, handing it to her, "or if there's anything I can do, don't hesitate to reach out." And with that, he returned to his motorcade, leaving behind not just a stunned officer, but a moment she would carry with her long after the city returned to its usual rhythm. It was a gesture that meant more than she could ever put into words. In her line of work, she had encountered countless people in moments of crisis, anger, and fear. But this was different. This moment was human, raw, unfiltered, and real. As Trump turned and walked back toward his car, the officer stood frozen, the card still resting in her palm. Her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. For the first time in a long while, a flicker of hope stirred within her. She watched as a motorcade disappeared down the street, the weight of the moment slowly settling in. The card felt heavier than it should, not because of its size, but because of what it represented. She never could have imagined a day when the President of the United States would stop, listen, and offer her genuine comfort. Clarity washed over her in a way it hadn't for months. His words echoed in her mind, reminding her that even in the hardest moments, there was room for compassion, for kindness, for hope. And for the first time in weeks, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could keep going. That night, sleep came slowly. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every pause. The encounter felt surreal. Someone so far removed from her world had understood her pain so completely. She thought about how long she had buried her feelings just to survive, to maintain the image of the strong, unshakable officer. But standing there that afternoon, she realized something profound. Strength didn't come from silence. It came from vulnerability, from allowing herself to be seen. Maybe it was time to loosen the armor she had worn for so long. Maybe it was time to heal. The days that followed felt different. When she walked into the precinct the next morning, she carried herself with a quiet confidence, her shoulders less tense, her head held just a little higher. Her colleagues noticed it immediately. They couldn't name the change, but they felt it. She began to connect with them in ways she never had before, sharing moments of honesty she once would have hidden. She learned that strength wasn't about denying weakness. It was about embracing both the light and the dark within herself. Over time, her openness became contagious. Others began to speak up too. Quiet conversations during late shifts, whispered confessions in the break room about stress, fear, and exhaustion. Slowly, the culture of the precinct shifted. Officers who once carried everything alone began supporting one another. What started as a brief encounter became something far greater, a ripple of compassion spreading outward. One morning, she arrived at her desk to find an envelope waiting for her. She recognized the handwriting instantly. Inside was a short, handwritten note from the President. "I hope you're doing well. I wanted to remind you that there's no weakness in reaching out when you need help. Keep pushing forward. You've got this." Her eyes filled with tears. It wasn't just a message. It was a reminder that someone, even at the highest level, cared about her well-being. The months that followed strengthened her in ways she hadn't expected. But she also learned that healing wasn't something she did alone. It came from community. The bond she formed with her colleagues became a lifeline. She learned to ask for help, and just as importantly, to offer it. As time passed, she began using her experience to help others. She worked with local organizations that supported first responders' mental health, sharing her story and encouraging others to speak out. She became an advocate, pushing for better resources, better conversations, and better care within the force. Her pain had found purpose. One evening, she organized a community event focused on mental health for first responders. Officers, families, and community members gathered for an honest conversation about struggle, resilience, and support. When she stood before the crowd and shared her story, her voice was steady, her message clear. No one should have to carry their burdens alone. The room listened in silence, some nodding, others wiping away tears. Healing, she realized, began the moment someone felt seen. Months later, as she stood in the precinct talking with a fellow officer, an unexpected sight stopped her mid-sentence. A familiar motorcade pulled up outside. Trump stepped out and made his way toward the building. "I heard about the event you held," he said with a smile. "I wanted to thank you. You're making a real difference." She was momentarily speechless. The gratitude in his eyes said everything. Standing there, she reflected on how far she had come, from feeling lost and overwhelmed to finding her voice, her strength, and her purpose. "Thank you," she said finally, "for helping me see what I was capable of." Trump shook his head gently. "You didn't need me to show you that," he replied. "You had it in you all along." She carried that lesson forward every day. She never forgot that first encounter, and she made it her mission to pass on the same kindness she had been shown. She understood now that the greatest acts of leadership didn't come from power or titles, but from showing up, listening, and offering compassion when it mattered most. And the legacy of that day, the unexpected meeting on a city street, continued to ripple outward, changing lives in quiet, meaningful ways.